Okay, welcome everybody to this Make Cycle, Make With Me that we're doing around the concept of doodling and sketching. And I just want to say my name is Kevin Hodgson and I teach 6th grade out in Western Massachusetts. I'm also part of the Western Massachusetts Writing Project. And if you're not familiar with what CLMOOC is, it's a connected learning MOOC that is in its 5th year at this point. The first 3 years were conceived, funded, and supported by the National Writing Project, as well as its partner, Educator Innovator. And then 2 years ago, the people who were part of it, including all of us, decided we would take it over since the National Writing Project was stepping out to do some other things. And for the past 2 years, a whole group of us have been behind the scenes planning different activities and inviting all sorts of people into the mix. And so been really, really interesting, I think, and challenging and fun in a lot of different ways. We are still working around different themes. And this week we're considering the idea of doodling and sketching as part of thinking and learning and writing and sharing and collaboration. So we're going to start out with some introductions. So I already said who I am, so I'm going to send it off to Sherry to introduce herself.
All right, hello, I'm Sherry Edwards, and I started as in 2013 with CLMOOC and have continued every year. And it's pretty amazing that are behind the scenes. Like this week, there's probably 10 in making this happen. So to everybody that is doing that, everybody here and more. And we just want everyone to have a great experience and do a little doodling this week. So Charlene, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks Sherry. My name is Charlene Doland and I am a project-based learning coach and I also facilitate a practice. And I believe this is the 4th year I've been doing CLMOOC, and every year I learn new things. And it's just great to have all the connections with people and be introduced to ideas and tools and so forth that I don't know about until I participate in this group. So Helen, would you like to carry forward?
Hi, I'm Helen DeWard. I teach with Faculty of Education here in Central Ontario, and this is my 3rd year with CLMOOC, and last year I worked with a couple of people actually organizing one of the weeks. This week I'm just getting into the MOOC at this point, and it's the doodling that caught me to come in and get caught up with this, and I'll explain why. So let's pass it to Wendy.
Hi everyone, glad to be with you all this morning. I'm Wendy Tallio from Central Australia. I think this is about the 3rd year that I've been doing CLMOOC, and it's just, well, I sort of continue doing CLMOOC really as the year goes on, dipping in and out of collaborations and picking up different themes. So really looking forward to this week on doodling. It's something that I've probably concentrated a bit more on in the last 6 months after Sketch 50, maybe, certainly with Helen and a few others. So yeah, let's continue the introductions. I will just say I'm a learning technologist by trade, but I really value this kind of make with me and maker space. It's a really critical part of creativity for my brain. Who's next?
Hi, I'm Lauren Zucker. I think it's my 4th year in CLMOOC, which I was introduced to by way of the wonderful Anna Smith. I am a high school English teacher in New Jersey and a doctoral student and adjunct professor at Fordham University in New York City. CLMOOC for me, especially, since it coincides with summer for teachers, it's just such a wonderful time to kind of experiment and play with new technology, with tech-less kind of creative ventures. So I'm really looking forward to continuing this summer with just experimenting, creating, and learning from such a wonderful group.
Great, thank you, everyone. It is a pleasure to have all of you here and hanging out. And so I'm going to turn it over actually to Sherry to get us started. And we're going to be talking about doodling and other things, and she's probably going to have us do a couple of doodly things. And if you're out there listening right now, you should doodle along with us. And if you're listening later on when we archive it, you should doodle whatever time period that is, I would say. Sherry.
All right, thank you, Kevin. So while everybody was introducing themselves, I sort of did a little doodle about what CLMOOC means to me. And there you can see a lot of smiling faces networked together. There's a reflection in a mirror of that doodle because we do a lot of reflection. And then it's a lot of hands-on and sharing all over the world and lots of support for each other. CLMOOC it's pretty awesome. So doodling, I don't know, I thought of this doodling activity because of Wendy and Helen in that Sketch 50 and Doodle a Day that I participated in. Oh, good, Susan is here. Let's do her introduction. Okay, we're going to turn it over to Susan.
I'm Susan Watson. I just got my power back on and my computer decided to do a huge update. So that was awesome. I teach middle school English and special ed at an alternative school. And I'm glad I was able to jump on here unexpectedly.
Awesome. All right, so doodling is an amazing, amazing way to kind of brain. And maybe I should turn it over to Helen, because Helen, I think you have a story to tell. Right? Oops, you're muted.
There. I'm not necessarily artistic by any means, but I got hooked into doodling with the Doodle a Day challenge when Royanne Lee laid out the challenge to anyone, and for a month I doodled every day. At least I tried to, and I think from that, the reflective piece at the end really had me hooked in. There's really something here that I think our students, or that we need to be doing for ourselves or for our students, giving them space to think really differently about what doodling can do in terms of your brain and your thinking, because doodling isn't as simple or as easy as you think it is, and when you start really reflecting on it.
Thanks, Helen. And that, oh, who was going to say something?
I was just going to ask Helen.
And that,
we seem to have a little lag going on here. I was wondering, Helen, if you could explain to us exactly what the Doodle a Day idea was all about.
Sure, yeah. Each day, Royanne sent out a prompt on Twitter. So the prompt would be to doodle something. In one case, it was just doodling lines, and in other cases, it was doodling an idea. And the very last doodle of the month was doodling about why you doodle, why you did Doodle a Day. So it was an opportunity for me. Each day I woke up and I checked the Twitter feed, and I then, there were a few people that doodled right away, so there were always a few doodles all set to go that I could see right away and get an idea. And then sometimes I got an idea right away in the morning and did a quick doodle, then went on my way, and then at the end of the day went back to see what other people had doodled. Other days it took so long, and it just had to really think it through, because it wasn't a clear and simple doodle so it took a lot longer. So it really was, Royanne posted, we doodled, we shared in Instagram or on Twitter, and just connected to other people who were doodling as well, and discovered that every doodler has their own doodling style, very unique style for most people. So that was interesting.
nuts.
Yeah, I'd say that Doodle a Day certainly started a habit, and it was something, it become addictive a little bit, and I completed like the whole month and started responding to other people's doodles and remixing other people's doodles. But it was really habit forming, and that certainly influenced my continuation of this sort of visual thinking.
I wanted to ask Helen what she meant by it's not as simple as people think.
I think one of the things I discovered is that when you think about an idea, at this point in my life, I think in text, because I'm immersed in text all the time. So I really had to break my brain open to think differently about how to craft a message or communicate an idea that was not bound by text. So I started using some iconography search engines like Noun Project, Flat Icon, and just looked for, well, how do I represent this idea with an image as opposed to with the words? So that's the part that I found was not as easy as I thought it would be.
Yeah, that's why I did the 2 doodle activities too, is because my brain does not things. You know, I can, when I'm writing my novel or NaNoWriMo, I can, my eyes closed, imagining my characters doing things. But to think of concepts and metaphor, those things are difficult for me to come up with an image. And I think it's so important for our students, because as I started with CLMOOC and everything was so visual and auditory, because we have a lot of musical people in here. We're used to in schools doing text, so I really started doing a lot more things with asking kids to draw a quick sketch of what you think of what the article means or what the message. So because I wanted them to start thinking in terms of and kind of twisting it. And I want to share Amy Berval's quote now, I think, because it's related to this, because she says, images can essentialize the cumbersome in beautiful ways. Stickiness for the viewer and challenge the critical thinking of the creator. And I think that is just so true. They just stick with you. You know, they can even change your mind, change your perspective. So, and Susan, I think maybe you could share something about your process and your feelings about doodling, because I know it's so important in your life, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure.
Calming, I think, was your...
Yeah, I find this all very interesting because I try my best not to think at all when I'm doodling. And that's why it works for me, because it is calming, and I'm a visual person. I struggle with video. I struggle with doing video and learning from video because I'm visual. I'm not an auditory learner. I don't ever know what I'm going to make when I start drawing, when I put pen to paper. I don't plan it out at all. If someone has asked me to do something, then obviously I think about what they are looking for. But the reason it works for me is because I don't think about it. I have ADD, and it helps me calm, focus. I looked back at some old notebooks and hadn't really realized that I've been doing it since I was a kid. I knew that I drew as a kid, but I didn't know that I doodled. And I know that, for example, I was in a meeting 2 years ago where I was extremely angry and I couldn't leave the meeting. And I just sat and scribbled. I mean, that was my coping, and that was the only thing that got me through that meeting. Now, whether that's doodling or not, it was a coping strategy, and seeing that scribble and having to channel my anger into that, it really worked for me. But I guess was interested in what Helen said, because to me, it's not complicated at all. It's not a lot of thought at all. Because you can't fail. It's impossible to do it wrong. So that way I don't have to have that fear of failure. I don't know if I answered your question, but.
Yep, you did.
So I just had one comment there. I've also had that experience of channeling emotion through doodling, and particularly on when video calls to my team at work, where I don't have other ways of expressing emotions so much, you know, like you can't sort of whisper to the next person and not have the other people hear, because everybody hears. So I've also used doodling definitely to channel emotions away from a verbal response where it's not necessarily a good thing. And I would also say that I've just tried yesterday I tried a Zen tangle, and I find that kind of annoying because you could get it wrong. You know, like you have to do the straight line there and then exactly there and then there. And it's like, I don't want to follow the circles of the bottle that I just traced around to create the base of. So yeah, maybe Zen tangles are not for me. They look amazing, but the ones that look amazing look like they're nearly been done by a computer. I don't know how to do that. Anyway, back to you, Sherry.
I try to steer people away from the Zentangle people, because they are very, very strict about copyright and all of these things. Like, this is a doodle. This is a circle and a line on a paper. Just because I put it on a square, etc. So there's a lot of books out now that are Zen Doodle. To get away from that whole Zentangle, you have to do it a certain way. You have to use certain pens and all of that. So Zentangle can be beautiful, but if you try to make it into some corporate thing, then it makes me angry. Can you tell? It's beautiful, but you don't have to do it that way. There is no way to do it wrong. That's my rating.
There we go. Yeah, I never thought of Zentangle as, I just, like when you said you don't think about it, you just do it. I just put that, and then it I have no idea what it turned out like. But for me, I doodle designs, thinking of emotions if I'm in a meeting and people are saying things that are just so not what I'm not. My margins and my papers are filled with designs, because I'm not an artist. I can't sketch a person or a dog. So I love having to have design, and then I can make it my own. And on this one, they say you're supposed to make it like this black and white checkerboard, but I decided just to make lines in this part. So I just kind of adapt it and change it to what I want.
Sherry,
because I agree with you, Susan.
I can
Go ahead.
I can
Laura.
speak to this too. Sherry and I connected over both of us being kind of newfound Zentanglers. I think that there is a tension between the kind of very kind of prescribed method and free flowing creativity, spill outside the lines, see what happens. Thank you. One strength, so I've only done Zentangling in a class with a certified Zentangle teacher, who led the class. So it came with what you were talking about, like the official bag with the special Zentangle pencil, right? And their, tiles that are just squares of paper that have their brand name on the back. The teacher was very nice. She said, I brought you plain white paper and the Zentangle tile, and you can try your pen on each one and see how it glides, And of course, I like the way my pen glides on the, trademark paper compared to the plain white. But in any case, what I liked about Zentangle was not only the experience of working on a piece of art for a whole hour or 2 hours. But it was the guidance of a teacher who was giving us kind of meditative, mindful instructions, like you don't really have to worry about where your marks go. You work in pen mostly, not pencil, which was something initially kind of disturbing to me, that I had trouble with. And you kind of just concentrate on the physicality of the movement and your breathing versus your, ruminating mind. So that piece I liked. And also in a class with all beginners, no one with any experience with the method, we came out with, 24 gorgeous, they looked professional, tiles. My husband, and tile is just a fancy word for a square piece of art, right? My husband would not be ashamed for me to tell you, he is not, he doesn't consider himself to be an artist, right? So here's his Zentangle, and I forget the name of this, but these shapes have names. So I noticed, Sherry, I was looking at some of your Zentangle work, and you named different designs that I had, made myself, which is kind of interesting to see consistency. So that was my husband's, and then here's my version of the same thing. Again, not an artist, right? But I wanted mine to look a little, geometric. I learned a little bit about shading. But I had that similar experience that you were saying, Sherry, where I didn't like the Zentangle shape. Like, this was a shape they had us make that was kind of a lollipop mushroom. To me, it was like a little psychedelic looking. So then the next time the teacher said to make that shape, I just made, leaves instead. I thought were prettier. So
awesome.
I took another art class last week, and I mentioned Zentangle, and the art teacher, a teacher of, a retired art teacher, said, "Oh, I hate Zentangle," right away. She said, "It's really stifles creativity." And I think yes and no, right? It depends kind of what you're in the mood for. It's not like an open, totally free. It's within the confine of even that square, right? I'm sure you could place them next to each other, but it's with restrictions. And I do think there's space, I'm sure other people can speak to this, for creativity within restrictions. I know in our teaching of writing, we can give writers limits or kind of little things to try and incorporate, and you can find a lot of freedom in those rules that can feel restrictive. Here's my CLMOOC doodle that I did while I was listening to you.
Oh, cool.
Nice. I wonder, so a lot of us are talking about, although I'm not one of them, that often will doodle like while you're listening. I'm doodling now while I'm listening. But we often tell our students to stop that, right? I mean, that's a kind of traditional kind of teacher response, which is, why are you drawing? Why aren't you listening to what I'm saying or whatever? And what do you have there, Sherry?
Wendy's Mountain. Listening to the music that you guys put together.
Yeah, I like that, Sherry. So you also wrote a short story. So the prompt was listen to the music, and you can either write a short story or, so it was Kevin's remix of Karen and myself's music, and you can write a short story or you can doodle. And it was lovely what Sherry saw in the music. But I think, to respond to you, Kevin, it's sort of like comics, in that for some reason at some point in a lot of kids' development, you split up this drawing of things and drawing of text, and you're now supposed to just write words, and you sort of don't do the drawing side so much. And so for some people, like for me, it's kind of a struggle to come back to putting those two things together. So I'm starting with the doodling, and I do use some computer programs like yourself, Kevin, to try and do comics, but it's a slow process. I feel like it's sort of a bit like wading through mud a bit.
I think as well that
So what can...
for a long time we have...
Go ahead, Charlene.
Sorry, am I still choppy?
Yeah, but it's okay. We can hear you.
Okay.
But it's okay.
I don't know why it's the same setup I had last time. But anyway, as adults, I think we've thought for a long time that if kids are sitting there doodling, they're not paying attention to what we're telling them. And that's definitely not always true, probably not, probably rarely true, that doodling process is helping them neurologically kind of capture what and process what they're hearing.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah,
and I think more and more research is showing that too. I think, and maybe the research has always been there, but it's starting to filter more into, at least maybe because I'm noticing it more, I don't know, into more educational communities.
So that is part of the reason probably for the new sketchnoting that people are having students do. And I don't know if any of you can speak to the sketchnoting.
I can, because I started doing it last year with my students, just to see how it would go. So sketchnote, actually that's what I'm doing right now. So sketchnoting is trying to kind of combine words and art to kind of keep track of a conversation or keep track of a speech or whatever video. It was really kind of interesting watching my students. Some really struggle with it, and some were like celebrating, you know, they could finally do doodling. They do art. I mean, I never tell a kid stop kind of drawing, but I think they have it so internalized that they stop themselves in a lot of ways. So actually, next year, that's one of my kind of goals, is to try to figure out ways to incorporate sketchnoting and visual note-taking a little, certainly more, but also a little more planned, to think about ways that can really kind of tap into students in a lot of different ways.
What are you holding up, Wendy?
So I was just going to share a sketch note that I did recently at a PhD seminar, and I attend these at work, and there are researchers at all different levels of their journey. But this one in particular, I just did a visual taking a line for a walk, and the square down the bottom was particularly evocative according to her slides. But I found it quite interesting just to do it without words to track the conversation. So the dots are where the sentences end, and the other white parts are part of her explanation of her thesis. And of course, this thesis was also about Indigenous artworks, and so I was restricted in that I couldn't copy the visuals that I was seeing. But a lot of the other sketchnoting that I've done, I've restricted myself just to one single screen on paper 53, and it has been quite tricky, and I feel that need to keep on practicing that skill, to be able to follow the conversation and to do the metaphors and to do the smart things, which is drawing more than what you can say, but then joining it to the next portion.
Helen, can you show that again? I missed your sketch note.
Well, I was just going to jump in because it's similar to what Wendy did. She took an event, a specific event, and then sketch noted or doodled around it. So I was participating last week with some other people around open stories. So this one is a sketch note that I've just done, kind of polished it off this weekend, and I doodle and draw both on my iPad and on paper. So because paper is you have to be forgiving, and you make mistakes. So there are lots of errors and omissions in this one, but this is all about 101 open stories. So if you look there's a website and a hashtag called 101 open stories. And there were a number of people who were interviewed last week about their stories about becoming open educators. So it really connected to the CLMOOC, the whole notion of, living in the open and participating and engaging and talking to people. So I just sketch noted all the conversations that I heard from that 101 open stories, because there were common themes that went through each of the conversations. So I really wanted to capture those notions. So I'm going to share it with the person who was running the sessions last week, so that she can see and other people can see the common threads that I found in those stories. So it was kind of neat.
I have a question for some of you more experienced sketchnoters, because I'm kind of not even dipped in yet. You know, like I read Mike Rohde, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, sketchnoting for educators, which was really evocative, and I'm still kind of stuck in the which kind of pen do I like the feel of, you know, like. But in any case, I was at a conference and I've been thinking about wanting to transfer over to more visual note taking, but I found myself too tempted, you know, to transcribe so many quotes and references verbatim. Most of what I've read about visual note taking and sketchnoting urges you to just draw right then, you know, in that hour session, if you will. But I wonder if any of you have a process where you take different notes, perhaps more text-based, right, during a course or a lecture or a talk, and then later sketch, like you were saying, Helen, common themes or a more minimalistic kind of summary.
I could respond a little bit to that. I'd do a shout out for Sylvia Duckworth. What she does is take notes and she draws later. So her diagrams are very succinct. They're very easy to follow. And really, when you look at her diagrams, you can, they do have text on it, and it's usually has a flow to it. It's got a theme, but she does that afterwards. So I think that's totally fine as well. And what I find is sometimes I have to listen for a few concepts and then I pick out my favorite and then I just draw that. And I might lose some of it, but you know, that's my choice in sketchnoting that particular way.
Well, I clicked a link on Twitter the other day and somebody was talking about, and I don't remember who or what, but they were complaining that too many people who are sketchnoting have too many words on their sketch notes. And so that kind of relates to what Lauren was talking about, but I have a right or wrong way when it's your sketch note and it's your way. And if I'm a verbal person, I think a few words are going to help me out.
I think too that it's audience. You know, so Lauren, I think if you're making your sketch note for you to remember the themes of that talk, and words are going to help you, like they would help me, then I would use them. Yeah, but I think if your audience is going to share it out, then probably I would lean maybe towards more visual, because that's kind of the expectation. But I don't know. When I do them myself, I have a lot of words, but of course I write so messy that nobody can read them anyway except for me. But I'm just trying to pick out little phrases here and there and use a lot of stick figures. Keep it really simple. If I go too complex, then I completely lose track of what I'm listening to.
Kind of a tangent, but in many ways, the sketchnoting reminds me of doing flowcharts that have existed for decades in the business world for flow charting relationships and decision points and so forth. So to me, it's kind of like just a more artistic and more fun way of addressing the same kind of information.
Right. I learned, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're right, Lauren.
I learned these fancy borders, you know, to put around a title, and all of a sudden I feel like, oh, my notes are much better now. they're much more interesting if I have a kind of like fun plaque shape or a frame around the heading versus just an underline or going to the next line. You know, it's just dressing up the notes I would have taken, but suddenly I'm more interested in them myself. You know.
This is just one
and that's
example
part of our visual world.
Yes, Sherry, definitely. This is a exercise from Doodle a Day, and it is look at a YouTube video, which is an instructional video, and try and draw it. So this is my YouTube video of how to make bulletproof coffee. So it's fairly simple, not many words, but that's an interesting exercise to do as well.
That sounds like a great one to do with students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to get started. So how is doodling like writing?
It's a way of communicating information. It's a way of expressing ideas. And sometimes, just like writing, you have to pick the right image or the right way, but there's still that something could be misinterpretation, because the image I choose may be different than, say, even misunderstand the word that I choose to use. So yeah, it's similar in that it's a way of communicating an idea that can be misinterpreted or can be very clear.
I just wanted to put in here a question that's on the other chat window from Karen, and she said, how is doodling different to note-taking? And so I guess that's where Sketchnote, my response to that would be that Sketchnote brings it together. But really, doodling for me might express a story, it might express emotion, it might express nothing, but it's just a way of doing it. It can tell a story, but others may not understand that story. So it's my story expressed in a different way. So I think doodling is very different to note-taking if we just leave the Sketchnote story aside for a little bit. Just doodling, randomly, or not thinking, or getting into the zone so that you don't have to think, for me, is part of doodling.
Can I segue into coloring a little bit? Sherry, is that okay?
Yes.
I think coloring was my entry point in terms of the social emotional learning aspect of it. So that's kind of where I come from with doodling. The research shows that coloring, like the adult coloring books, has the same effect on your brain as meditation. So that's how I kind of started as an adult, figuring out that this pen to paper thing had a calming effect on my brain. And that's one of the choices that we give the kids for a calming activity at my school, because they all have behavioral issues. And some of them have moved on to doodling, and some of them are still using the coloring. They'll come in upset. That'll be one of their choices, and that'll calm them right down. So I think, doodling is fantastic, but I think coloring is a great entry point, depending on what you're using it for. And kind of like Zentangle, it's an easy, structured way to create something beautiful. And sometimes that's enough you need, and that's, it depends on the purpose. I've never done the Sketchnote thing because I tend to lose a lot of information if I try to do that. But kind of like Wendy, after the fact, I'll try to use a visual representation of some sort after a presentation. If I try to do it during, I just can't. I lose a lot. I lose most of it.
And of course, Susan, in our little chat here, you mentioned Nick Susani's work also. Remember when we did that grid structures? And my students absolutely love that. At first, they looked at me like I was absolutely crazy, and I said, just shapes. And that was just pretty awesome. So you know what? Let's try a little doodle. If you have a piece of paper out there, I would like you to just, anywhere on your paper, just draw 5 dots. Anywhere, not like mine, your own way, just 5 dots. When you have your 5 dots done, what you're going to think of is one of them's the head, two of them are feet, and just turn your paper until you see a shape. So I turned that one around, and a person looks like he's, maybe a spider came up on her, and she's going, looking down at that spider. And then I did this one. And that became a runner. 5 dots on a paper can become a person.
When I think for students, this is a really low stress entry point for a lot of different ways of communicating, whether it's coloring or doodling or starting out with something like a square or 5 dots. I think in terms of, at least for my students, middle school students, a lot of them have apprehension about, you know, performance and failure. And a lot of these activities give them a very low stress entry point, which I think is important.
I found, I've taught Native American students, and so many of them, they begin images, and it was much easier for them, for some, to, when it came to presenting, they could think of a design or an image to help them. So some of my students really took off on that, and they helped the other kids think of images. But starting out with that slow 5 dots really helped a lot of my kids just think, oh, I can do that. And we also did something called small art, and I gave them like little 1-inch squares of paper. And I just said, something that's red. And then they would quickly come up with an image, just sketch it out as something that would be red. And then we'd put them all together on a black piece of paper, and they'd say, oh, you know, it looked really cool. Just something simple like that.
Like a quilt, huh?
Yeah. Any other easy things you could think of for students? Oh, there we go. I never knew I could rock climb, see? Awesome.
I seriously couldn't find a person. It just didn't work for me, but I made a flower.
And that's what we'd say. In CLMOOC, we accept all efforts. That's what I love. And, you know, maybe I should say this too, is that I'm in another class, and you have such high expectations now for personalizing my learning and for connecting with others. Whenever I take any, just don't seem the same. Because we put out a prompt and it could become a symphony instead of a poem or instead of a doodle. And that just shows how, if we're open, from within ourselves, we're able to express that learning, that idea, or take off some, as Terry Elliott would say, the adjacent possible, something that nobody else had thought of, but it's still related. I think that's important.
Yeah, and I guess I just wanted to say what I find from CLMOOC generally is that if I'm doing mini projects, little exercises, you know, I don't do classroom teaching, so I don't have to create exercises for other people. But these little exercises for me are like germinating seeds, and then they can grow into other projects. So I've recently done a sort of serious hackathon on the weekend, and I actually used a CLMOOC idea during that hackathon. And it was from a little project that I did to do with turning data into design. And I created something on a much, much larger scale from data. So it's been quite powerful in that way.
So what would
I think the connecting these things, you know, even just the doodle a day, we wouldn't have known about that if without all the connectedness of Twitter and being able to have a public worldwide audience for anything that you do pretty much immediately. And that goes with the connected learning principles too, just feeling like you're a part of a community, not just CLMOOC, but other people that are, interested in whatever that it is that you're doing. I've taken a lot of the things that we do in CLMOOC into the classroom as well. I always am excited to do that, and I am again this year.
And tell us a little bit about how you think through those comics that you got. I love those.
Well, I think, for me, I'm mostly word person, I guess is the way to say it, right? So I like doing the comics because it kind of breaks me out of that and kind of forces me to think visually in a way that doesn't really happen naturally for me. So it just becomes a really kind of interesting way to kind of use humor and sarcasm and other literary devices, kind of to poke fun at myself and sometimes at others too. Hopefully never in a mean way. But for me, so this has always been the case for me with making kind of comics, that when I tried to do the artwork myself years ago, it was, I won't say it's horrible, but I didn't really like it that much. So I'm always on the lookout for kind of either collaborators or apps that kind of help me kind of do that. So I kind of wish that wasn't the case. I wish I could control everything from the ground up. But either I don't have the patience for it or I don't have the artistic vision for that. So it's always been this kind of interesting balance of trying to find something that will help me represent ideas in the way I want it to do, without losing all my agency as a writer to the artwork that somebody else has already created. And so this kind of balance there, I think, is always a tricky piece for me. But, in the classroom, kids love making the comics, and we do them quite a bit around, either telling stories or representing ideas in different ways. Often I have them partner up so that if somebody is a writer and somebody is an artist, sometimes they can work together and solve the problem that I haven't been able to solve myself. But again, it's that, thinking about what your own strengths are and also trying to work with those as well. For me, like I did the Doodle a Day with a number of you out here. And that was my first really extended period of trying to think about a theme a day and how would I represent it. And then I just through July did a similar idea over on the Mastodon network, where there was somebody out there putting out themes every day. I like about 30% of the doodles that I did for probably both those projects. But that's okay, because I think it was an interesting experience all around.
I think it's good to share even the things that you're not 100% happy with, because sometimes it means something to other people that it might not mean to you, and it's taking a risk, being vulnerable. But I think the comics again speak to accessibility. Like I don't. Everybody's busy. Everybody has a million things to do. I might not feel like reading a 3-page blog post, but if you can, at some points, not always, but have things that are more accessible, like comics and pictures and visuals, I think it just helps people to have access to that way of thinking. Nothing wrong with blog posts, but I get tired of words sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's why we are doodling, and sketching and adding so much multimedia, because that's the way the world is now.
Which is interesting, Sherry, because I'm looking, part of my research this year is looking at multimodal assessments in higher education and looking at why is it just all words and what tech tools can be available. So I'm looking at VoiceThread and how that can be used for assessments, because that tool encourages not just words. It starts as a visual and then you can have a conversation around the visual. And the visual can be, it doesn't have to be PowerPoint. It can be a JPEG. It can be any format, pretty much from anywhere. It can be a movie. So I think that's quite interesting about that's the way the world is now. But where is education, and where are we allowing students to show their learning, and like serious showing, as in the assessment side of it. So for higher education and further education, as in further degrees, it's all about the words. And I've had a struggle in putting in visuals into my master's assessments, but I'm getting there. I'm understanding how to reference it so that it's acceptable. But it's an interesting question.
It is. I really like VoiceThread, but I think it's Flash based. Over to HTML, and Adobe just announced they're not going to develop it after. So
I'd just like to put in a plug there that it's partly Flash based, and they're progressively moving to HTML5. So give them time and it will be totally HTML5. But at the moment it does require a bit of Flash for some of the features.
Yep, I love VoiceThread.
But I think I'm like you, Kevin. I would like to see within the structures of what I'm teaching, I'd like to see a really intentional use of image and iconography, and not necessarily sketchnoting, but I'd like to see that doodling, that playful stuff coming back into the course I teach. I teach media and digital literacy, so it's the whole gamut. But I think there's a big place for this, so that the teacher candidates that I work with can also experience it as they're trying to learn about how to integrate it into a classroom, and just to give themselves permission to have some fun. And then they can give their students permission to have some fun, to create, in different ways.
Have fun and still demonstrate learning. I think that's the awesome part about it. It just totally opens it up to so many different possibilities.
The question that comes back to me, though, is if I put a picture, or say if I do a doodle, and I put that in as an assessment piece, how do I prove what it's, what I've learned? And so that's where words, words are so, I have learnt this. And so if you read that, then you can take it at face value. But interpretation of colour, interpretation of lines, interpretation of visuals, that seems to be where some assessment, it's the way the assessment's written, right? So that's the critical point. But it's how do you guide people to mark that in a fair fashion? How do you accept a wide variety? So CLMOOC accepts everything, right? I make up my own assessments and you guys mark it perfectly. It's all fantastic, and I can improve if I want to, which I usually try to do. So it's, yeah, as Susan said in the chat, to ensure rigour in the type of material that you're producing. And there's got to be a way to do it for doodling. I mean, doing a PhD, as Nick has done, is certainly rigour.
It certainly is.
And I know he talks about how difficult that was, though, to get through that. So I think it's a question that continues to vex a lot of people, pushing up
and
against
to be
it.
open in the process.
Yeah.
Openness was another big hassle.
Even just having a conversation with someone about creating memes in a higher ed classroom as a way of showing what you know, because it's critically consolidating, analyzing, synthesizing, filtering everything down to 5 or 6 core pieces of text and an image that supports what that text is saying. I mean, that's an excellent way to evaluate if students really got that big idea or not. And how do you use that in, well, we have to write an essay. No, you don't.
All right, there's a little side conversation here we should probably talk about before we close up, and that is using asking students to explain their learning through conversation, perhaps using the flip grid like we've been doing. There's some nice back and forth going in our CLMOOC flip. And just finding ways so that we understand the message in that demonstration. Well, technology either, right, Susan? Okay. Defend their learning, that's right. Stand up for ourselves and defend what we've shared.
Yep, a lot to think about, that's for sure. So we're going to be wrapping things up for this Make With Me, and we appreciate everyone who joined us here and who's on the chat and who will watch later on. I had one question that I thought I'd toss out to us. If you can pass if you want, but before we say goodbye, is there anything that is really difficult for you to draw? So for me, it's hands, and I think that's maybe a common thing for artists, but I'm not quite sure. But whenever I do like hands on my comics and stuff, they always look really bizarre, which sometimes works, but sometimes doesn't. Is there anything you guys have trouble drawing?
Feet.
Feet.
I have, they look like bananas or something. It's just wrong.
For me, eyes.
Mm.
Eyes. Because the eyes have so much that, yeah, it's hard to do eyes.
For me, it's something that somebody else asks me to draw.
Mm.
Then I feel pressure.
Yeah.
Those are the hard. I can just say the whole face.
Charlene?
Humans in general for me.
How about you, Lauren?
I had a hard time drawing everything. Just now, I tried to sketch note in the last 10 minutes, and I was so heavily reliant on words, but Wendy's seed planting idea helped me get visual. I didn't know how to abolish the rules without getting really graphic, you know.
Looks pretty good.
It does.
So
That's awesome.
we want to say before we head out today that there is a Twitter chat coming up on Thursday. Sherry, do you have that information in front of you at all? Put you on the spot.
Is it at 4? Is it at 4 o'clock or?
So 4 o'clock Pacific, right? 7
Right,
o'clock
4 o'clock.
Eastern. I have no idea the other time zones because I can never remember all that. But all the information is at the CLMOOC website, and we'll certainly be putting it out on Twitter and in the G Plus and other places, I think. And we hope that people will join us for the extended conversations about all these different topics and from there. So I guess that's probably about it for tonight.
Oh.
Sherry, want to say anything?
All right. Now I want to say thank you. Everybody do a few doodles, share them at the hashtag CLMOOC on Twitter or the Google Plus or Facebook or a flip grid. And share and try to find a collaboration and enjoy.
Great. We'll have a doodler badge too, right, Lauren?
Yes, we have a doodler badge ready for you to claim.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to stop the broadcast now, and thank you all.